What should be my first chapter? This is a question that a lot of people who want to start writing their book or interested in writing ask me. They want to know, how do I begin? Well, I love that question, and I've got some really creative ways and really embodied ways to think about the beginning of your book. I am thrilled you are here for another episode of The Written Compass, so let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Written Compass. Oh my goodness, we are full into the end of the year, December. If you are watching this, if you are listening to this live, then you are probably in the midst of all the things December. If you're catching this later, I hope this meets you right where you needed to. I wanted to dive in today about first chapters or the beginnings of books, because if you've ever had to do any kind of planned communication, whether that's been verbally, like if you've prepared a presentation or a speech of some sort, or a writing of some sort, it could be an email, it could be a social media post, it could be an article, a blog, and yes, a book, you've probably had to consider how you want to begin, how you want to start, what do you want to do at the beginning of this piece, whatever it is, this communication you're creating. So in today's episode, I wanted to kind of break down some common ways that folks begin their books and how we can think about this to really bring the reader in and get them ready for the rest of the content. So you're going to hear me talk about maybe some new words, and I'll share about this a little bit, but you've probably experienced these different types of starts or beginnings to books. And so we just want to name them really clearly today and offer them up to you to just consider. So to dive right in, first, I want to talk about kind of what are we doing at the beginning of a piece of writing, particularly a book. So there's a purpose to it. And so I really want you to think about, what do you want that purpose to be for you? So how would you, when you kind of feel into it for a moment, you can take a moment. I'm closing my eyes right now because that's just what I do. And when I think about the beginning of my book, like, what do I want the reader to feel? What do I want them to know? What do I want them to experience? I recently started working with an amazing client, and we talked about together about, I need you to get ready, right? Like, I need you to be prepared for this book. This is not going to be your average book. So we talked about the ways that we could do that. So kind of the rhetorical situation of the beginning of a book can have lots of different purposes. So when you are, as I'm kind of walking through some of the common ways that people often start their books, and my clients have done kind of all of these, I want you to really feel into how do you want the reader to feel? How do you want to feel as you're introducing your book? And then the other thing I want you to realize is you don't have to start at the beginning. A lot of times people get stuck when they try to begin a piece of writing at the beginning. So I like to tell people, don't worry about that. Yes, wherever you start may wind up being the beginning, the words that you write and the ideas, the stories, etc., but it may not. And oftentimes what needs to be at the beginning isn't revealed until you've drafted almost the full book. And that's really fun. So let me go ahead and dive in. Now that we've kind of set the stage of like the rhetorical, which just means like, what are the considerations between you as the writer, the audience, the book, this thing that you're creating? What do you need to consider? And now we want to dive into like, what are some actual examples of books, of ways to begin books? So first is you could have a foreword. What a foreword is just something that typically someone else writes for you, and it prepares the reader for the book, and it allows them to brag on you a little bit. So a foreword might be aligned for you if you really want someone to get an understanding of who you are as the author through someone else who knows you really well, through their lens. Now, a foreword can really serve a lot of purposes. It can give a lot of weight if you have someone who maybe is relatively well known in your area of expertise and that person writes the foreword. It can give your book a little bit of a different weight. You can even, some people kind of put who wrote the foreword on the cover of their book or on the back matter of the book so that readers know, oh, I know that person. And if they're connected to this author, then yeah, I definitely want to read it. So it can be a little bit of a strategic marketing thing to have a foreword. It's also, again, just a nice way to not have to talk about yourself and let someone else do it. Like, what can people expect from you as a person, as the writer of this book? So again, a foreword happens at the beginning. It's going to be something that someone writes for you. They may tell a story about how they've known you. They may talk about how to prepare, why they need to get excited and ready for this book. It also is a little bit of a book review. Sometimes at the beginning in the foreword. So a foreword is just a really interesting choice that I've had some of my writers use a foreword and it's worked really well. And then others who have chosen not to because it just didn't feel aligned for them. So a foreword is one way to begin your book. Another way is a letter to the reader. And this is just what it says. The author writes a letter to the reader that can feel really personal and in a really warm way into the rest of the book. So this is almost a little bit of a break, a little bit of a different type of writing than maybe the reader is going to experience throughout the rest of the book. And it's a way to say, hey, reader, from me, author, I'm so glad you're here. Let me tell you about this book, right? Let me tell you what to expect. Let me tell you a little bit about what inspired me to write it and where I'm coming from. So it's kind of this personal way to get connected to the reader, help them feel connected to you. You can also still introduce what they can expect in the book. And sometimes that's really nice to say for people who are using kind of a strategy approach to their book. One of my clients just published her book and kind of her MO is it's a coach in a book type of book. And so she needed to use her letter to the reader as a way to say, hey, here's what you can expect. Here's how to prepare. Here's how to read this book, meaning you can start at the beginning and go to the end. You could jump around if that makes sense for your book. But the letter is just an informal kind of more personalized way to do that. And again, I like that letter because it's just like a nice, warm way, and it might be a little bit different type of writing than the rest of the book. So it's a little way to kind of break away, have a little something at the beginning that not only gets the reader ready for your book, but also helps them feel connected to you. So that's another possibility. Another way that people like to start their books is what's called an introduction. And again, similar to the letter, it is a little bit of a different type of writing, a different way to write. And it literally introduces the reader to the book. So it's similar to the letter, but typically this is going to be a little bit more formal. So this might really dive into this is what you can expect from this book, more of the nuts and bolts of how to read it, what you want the reader to do, if there's any kind of interaction. You can tell them step by step how to read this book. Introductions can also have any kind of material that maybe you feel like you didn't want to get into in the chapters or the bulk of the content of the book, but you feel like it's something that could help the reader as they're reading it. So this might be terms they might need to know. This might be a little bit of background information that they might need to know that could be helpful to them, so that as they're going through the rest of the book, they've got that with them, and that's going to support them in understanding the rest of your chapters. So an introduction, similar to the letter, a little bit more formal, often has some prep kind of matter in it. And then finally, another way to begin is to just begin, just jumping right into that first chapter or that first piece that is going to dive right into the essentials of your book. And obviously, if you're going that route, it's going to be something that is connected to the other chapters, right? Like you're intentionally putting this one first. So you want to be strategic about what that first chapter is, if it matters, in relation to the other books, right? So chapter one, first chapter or a first part is just that, just diving right into it. But you want to strategically think about what should come first, obviously, in relationship to the rest of the book. But there's no, it's the style, it's the content that's going to be that the reader's going to expect for the rest of the book. So just to kind of recap, ways that you can creatively begin your book is with a foreword. that someone else writes for you, a letter to the reader, which has that nice personal warm feel, kind of like a warm hug, I consider it, an introduction, which is a little bit more formal, similar to a letter, but a little more formal, and then just the first chapter, just going right in. But pulling back big picture, again, you want to make sure you're feeling into how do I want the reader to experience this book and what might need to come first to help cultivate that. And again, a lot of my clients and writers don't worry about this part until they've drafted almost a full draft of the book. So I'm curious, what types of introductions, beginnings of books do you really like? Feel free to write a review, leave a comment, send me a message on Instagram at @ShaynaHartman_. I love talking about some of these nuts and bolts types of things, but I also want to make sure that we feel into the alignment because ultimately there are no rules and you get to decide. Thanks as always for joining me, and I look forward to catching you next time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Written Compass. If you are enjoying this content, do me a favor and go and review the podcast. This allows me to share and get these messages out to the people who really need them, who we want to read their books in the future. You can also go and share your thoughts and tag me at @ShaynaHartman_ on Instagram. Again, this is just a way for us to get connected and share the writing love. And if you know that you are ready to write your book, that message that's been burning inside of you for a long time, then I want to talk to you. My team and I want to talk to you. Head on over to ShaynaHartman.com and click Work with Us. From there, you'll see an application to explore and see if writing your book is your next best step.